All right, so this time I wanted to add to the concept of strategic versus tactical types that we often hear about in the Keirsey system or Socionics, and sometimes maybe in MBTI. So one of the things I wanted to add that I felt was missing from the Keirsey and Socionics systems is this middle ground between strategic and tactical. Now, in military documents, okay, actual military doctrine, we would actually say that there are three-tier system. You have strategic, operational, and tactical. Now, how does this break down in terms of socionics? Well, strategic, as I've listed on the top, is mostly NI focused with NE support. Why? Because you need to determine what are your long-term goals? What's the end state? Why are we doing this? And then where do we stop? When is it over? When is the war over? How are things going to play out when this war is done? Is this going to be a short war? Is it going to be long? What is the consequences of it or benefits of it as time goes by, decades, centuries? And then what's your legacy? Legacy is something that also may get lost. And I think a lot of NI types would relate to this heavily. The idea of legacy. How will I be remembered for this war, for this conflict, or how it played out, how I prosecuted the war, etc.? How will I be perceived historically over time? Right? Very NI stuff. Okay. NE is there to just kind of support that, right? What are the possibilities? What are the possible outcomes? What are the possible ways that could be perceived? What are the possible stuff, right? And then at some point, I have to choose one. I have to pick the narrative that I want. So that's more NI focused, okay? Now, in the middle, this is the part that is often left out of discussion. You have operational. Okay, how the fight itself will be conducted. How is it going to be organized? How will it be fought? In what ways are we going to engage the enemy with what? What are the resources? Which resources are best to use it? How are we going to manage those resources? So all of that, I would say, is very TE and TI. It's TE in terms of it needs practical understanding. What is the practical and the how we actually do it? How do I pick up this rocket system and work the tools on it to hit the button, to lock onto a target, to hit the target and destroy the target, right? How do I manage entire battalions of people in the most organized and effective way? Very TE stuff, but also has to have TI in there somewhere because you need organization. You need a doctrine. You need a structure that the entire army is going to operate off of, right? So it's a bit of all that. So TE and TI here on these first 3 points. And then on the bottom 3 points, we have determining the morale of friendly forces and enemy forces, determining political sentiments among friendly parties and unfriendly parties. So your allies, okay, your people who may support you, or unfriendlies, okay, your enemy side, people who may be on the side of your enemy or more inclined to be on the side of your enemy. You need to suss out how they feel about this conflict. Which side are they on? Who do they care about more? And the last part, determining any moral or ethical standards you kind of want to throw in there. What is correct way to fight this fight and what is incorrect? Okay, from an ethical point of view. What are those areas you don't want to cross because it's just not a good thing, either in a practical sense or in a cultural, moral sense, where people are going to be incensed by what you're doing, right? So we don't use chemical weapons nowadays. Why? Well, there's a moral component to that where people just feel like it's bad to have people drowning in their own fluids in their lungs, right? We just say, oh gosh, that just sounds awful way to die. So there's that reason. But another reason is a practical one, is a TE one, which is that chemical weapons are unstable weapons. Once you unleash them onto the field, they're just as dangerous to your own troops as they are to the enemy's troops. Why would I want to use a weapon system that may backfire onto me? Right? So those are practical reasons why I wouldn't want to use something, and that's ethical, moral reasons why I may not want to use something. So we're seeing TE and we're seeing FI and we're seeing a bit of FE. We're seeing all of those kind of coming together here to create the rules of engagement, as we would call it in the American system. Rules of engagement, how to fight. Then finally, we get to the tactical side. We get to an SE focused environment, again, supported by SI. Okay, you need to understand the advantages and disadvantages of the battle itself. Who has more numbers on their side? Who has more weapon systems on their side? Who has a better understanding of those weapon systems? Where are they? Are they on your left flank? Are they on your right flank? Are they surrounding you? Are they in front of you? Are they dug in? Are they on the move? Where are they? What are they doing? They're in motion. Okay. What kind of weapon systems do they have? That is a multiplier. If you want to do a medieval style battle, okay, there's a difference between 10 guys with a rock in their hand versus 5 guys, but they're all wearing armor plate with shields and swords and heavy weapons. Those weapons and armor makes a big difference on who has the advantage here. So weapon systems. And then timing, right? This is big for SEs, timing. Exploiting the best advantages. Maybe there's a moment where I realize that I catch the enemy by surprise. They're not prepared, right? Or I catch them in their sleep. I catch them disorganized. They're confused, whatever. And I realize I have a window of opportunity of advantage that I can exploit that advantage now, right? That's very SI stuff. Now, all this is going to be supported by SI because you need, of course, to be mindful of how well rested are your people? Are your soldiers rested and fed and in a physical fighting shape that they actually can exploit the opportunity? Or are all of your people exhausted, tired, hungry, just out of it, and they can't really execute the maneuver you want? They're not in fighting shape. In order for me to conduct a battle, I need to supply bullets, bombs, food, all this other stuff, the logistics of war, in order to have functioning weapon systems and have functioning troops, right? So you need to make sure that SI happens. So this is kind of a nice breakdown, I think, on how strategic, operational, and tactical can be put into sort of a system, a theoretical system of cognitive functions and elements. Obviously, this is kind of like just the theory, the framework. In the real world, it gets a little bit messier than this because any human being is going to be using a mix of these things. But what you're looking for, if we're trying to type, is the individual who maybe is just leaning very heavily into one area or another. So it's common for us to look at people like Erwin Rommel, Patton, Hannibal of Carthage, people like this who were brilliant tacticians. They were fantastic in the field. They knew how to exploit opportunities. They knew how to be fast and maintain momentum of a situation. They knew how to cleverly use their weapons in different ways. They knew how to outmaneuver their enemies. That was a big part of these guys. Very good in the battlefield at finding better angles of attack and defense, encircling the enemy, ambushing the enemy, changing situations to their advantage in the field. These guys were all very good at this kind of stuff. Napoleon is a big one as well. Very SE. He believed heavily in speed and momentum of the attack. That's what made him so very successful. His core system was one that created an organizational framework for his armies. And that framework allowed them to move faster. It allowed them to advance on enemies much quicker than their enemies could advance on them. That speed became deadly. So you just heard me describe a very SE individual with TI going on in there, a combination of TI and SE, organization, doctrine, combined with speed, impact, force at the decisive point of attack. Now, these individuals often suffered from lack of NI. Okay, they often had unclear long-term goals, unclear end state. It was unclear when these wars were meant to finish in a lot of cases. Some of these guys at times also forgot about or just disregarded other things. SI support. What what is the famous Napoleon going into Russia situation? He disregarded his logistics. He moved so far and so fast and so deep into Russia that he was further and further away from his logistical support in freezing Russian conditions. And most of his army simply faded away through attrition from the weather, from the environment. He was losing lots of men, not from battle, but from just logistics, lack of resources. He just decided to ignore SI, demonstrating a lot of SE, but ignoring of SI. Erwin Rommel was fantastic in many of his battles, tremendous maneuvering. He was called the Desert Fox for a reason, but he often ignored the SI components. His logistics was always weak and always strained, and he was just continuing on in the attack regardless of that. This ends up biting him in the ass when he eventually goes up against good old Montgomery, who was the opposite, a very SI organized individual. He built up his forces to huge numbers, lots of strength. And so when they went at it at the Battle of El Alamein, Rommel was pretty much weak from the start. He did not have enough gas, enough fuel for his vehicles and his tanks to sustain the fight. And he was outnumbered in armored vehicles, something like 7-1. It doesn't matter how much phenomenal maneuvering you do. If you just don't have the resources to fight, you can't fight. He ignored SI at his peril, just like Napoleon did. Again, NI, where are we going with this? What is the point of this battle? Are we fighting battles for the sake of battles, or are these battles going to actually get us somewhere? Hannibal was criticized well by one of his generals for saying, Hannibal, you know how to win a victory, but you don't know how to exploit it. And what he meant by that, I paraphrase that a little bit, but what he meant by that was Hannibal had just finished winning a spectacular victory at the Battle of Kanai, a battle that to this day is studied by military experts everywhere for its stunning, complete annihilation of a superior Roman army. But even after winning the battle, Hannibal failed to decisively destroy Rome, weaken and beat Rome so that Rome would no longer be a threat to Carthage again. To, in other words, end the war and win. Hannibal decided against going at Carthage. So he was phenomenal in the field at winning battles against superior odds or superior enemies. But what's the point when you don't actually finish the fight and win the war itself? Lack of NI. Couldn't quite figure out how to finish it. On a closing point, we just mentioned a bunch of very famous individuals that were predominantly SI users and were tactical geniuses. You're likely to find a lot of these characters in history because it just makes a lot of sense for very SE focused individuals to want to go into military things, to want to rise through the ranks, become colonels and generals and high-ranking people and fight the battles in the field. Usually your more NI-ish people are not interested in fighting these battles in the field and maybe more drawn towards the political side of things, being the president of the country or being the chief of staff of the entire military overall. They're not the ones in the field fighting the fight, but the ones back at home sort of directing how the entire nation's military will be constructed and continue to function. That's more likely where you might find those guys. Some interesting characters. that you often also see doing really well when they appear. They're harder to find, but when you find them, they seem to make some of the greatest generals or admirals or whatever. Are individuals that are not SE focused. So you find ENTJs, the LIEs, people like the Duke of Wellington. The Duke of Wellington has gone down in history, and his name is so well known because he defeated the great Napoleon. Napoleon, who is credited for probably winning more battles than any person in world history. His great nemesis that took him down is the Duke of Wellington. Duke of Wellington is usually an LIE. I'm sure World Socionics Society views him that way, and I kind of have to agree. It's, it's probably a good thing or a good typing. What would the Duke of Wellington have as an LIE? Well, he would have TE as his dominant function with NI and with NE. These would be three of his main functions working. Okay. What's the problem for these ENTJs though? Usually their SE is a mobilizing function. It takes time for them to really kind of get better at this. And in the case of the Duke of Wellington, it took some time. He had some issues in his early career. But over time, he got better, solved some of this SE mobilizing issues, and now this became probably just as good as the rest of them. So TE, better understanding of how to fight, the smart way to fight, to manage your resources, how to use your troops, how to use different kinds of troops, how to use them in different ways, understanding of what is the long-term goals. The Duke of Wellington knew in many cases fighting in Spain that it was better to bleed the French dry slowly over time, only engage in direct battles that he could win, or withdraw, fight guerrilla style battles that would slowly bleed the French dry, and that would drive the French nuts because the French were really wrapped around this whole tactical doctrine, this fast, aggressive, direct confrontation that leads to a final decisive battle. Instead, the Duke of Wellington fought many guerrilla style withdrawal campaigns in Spain for years. This helped out great. And he won a lot of allies along the way, supporting the Portuguese, eventually getting more Spanish on his side, working with Spanish guerrillas, etc. Being very creative, combining that NE, different possibilities and opportunities, exploiting those opportunities, staying in with the long game, keeping allies in the fight. Okay, with TE, and then enough SE to really understand how to exploit opportunities, how to arrive at the battle using all of this, how to arrive at the battle with enough advantages that you can take chances that you're not going to be surprised that some lucky outmaneuvering trick that Napoleon is going to pull is not going to be enough, because you have brought more resources, better morale, better troops, better organized, more allies. Everyone is working more cohesively to the fight that it counters all this SE stuff. So what am I saying? ENTJs make the greatest commanders and so on. The end, everyone else should just retire. No. It kind of demonstrates how someone's personality in positions of leadership can make quite a difference. Now, you could argue that yes, this is sort of simplified and we're focusing on just the individual commanders involved. And of course, there's going to be more background things happening. There's going to be the society, the culture, the time period, other random variables happening, etc. But for the sake of personality typing, we're just focusing on the individuals and what they bring to the table. I've started this particular breakdown of strategic, operational, and tactical because I want this to be part of a series going forward that I'm going to be doing, starting with Zelensky, Ukrainian president or prime minister. I'm not sure what the hell he is, prime minister maybe. And President Putin of Russia. So I'm going to be referring back to the strategic, operational, and tactical as how it relates to those individuals and how it relates to the ongoing war in Ukraine, and how we can, from this socionics understanding, glean into how the war has been fought so far and where the war is going in the future, and maybe make some predictions on who's actually going to win this fight. So tune in for that on the next one. I hope this was interesting, educational, adding a little something to the Keirsey and Socionics style information on strategic and tactical. And don't forget operational. Don't forget where all these other functions should go. Okay. So as always, like and subscribe. Leave your comments on the bottom. Let me know what you think. And I hope to see you guys on the next one when I start talking about the Ukraine war. All right.